such a psychologically safe space, we are embracing the fail-forward mindset for this discussion. So we are using all the interactive methods that are provided to you as delegates in 1 hour. So all of us need to now be on our A game. So I will kind of erect a very flimsy scaffolding for the session by introducing the 3 main components of this, which is a live co-creation session that ultimately will involve all of us. So the first piece is, I think we heard a lot yesterday about design schools being contextually relevant. And I mean, imagine we would have been alive in the 60s in California. I have amazing images. But now we are in 2022 in Cape Town, and we are going to induct all of you into the Africa with a K movement. So some of you might have picked up that the Design School Africa is not spelled with a C, but with a K. And there's a little star there, which is sort of an explanation of what the Africa with a K movement is. And I think in terms of the contribution of the panelists, we have 2 excellent guides who will help us unpack the Africa with a K movement. One of the elders of that movement is Mugendi from Kenya, and he's a Pan-Africanist with a K, and he has also unpacked the notion of Ubuntu, which in East Africa is called Utu, but it has different names, like we learned yesterday. Exactly. We are doing similar practices on the continent, but we're calling it different things. And Mugendi's contribution is from a participatory design angle. So if we use this notion of Ubuntu, whatever it means, so point 1 is interrogate what it is. How does it show up in participatory design work? And then my sister Phumzile, she is coming from the self-leadership, coaching, and mentoring space, and she's a fellow South African, so she will also dive into unpacking Ubuntu and how it shows up in terms of self-leadership, where it all starts. So the first piece is really interrogating Ubuntu. To help us do this, we need the online audience, please, to go onto the Miro board for this session, and please, while Mugendi and Phumzile interrogate and unpack the notion of Ubuntu, please capture whatever values you think come to mind when you listen to their stories of how this shows up. And the people in the room, you all have Post-its in your delegate bags. So please make use of actual Post-its. They will be harvested in a very spiritual ceremony at the end, so please give us your best thinking. So please get out your Post-its and your pens, and while we are doing the first piece around interrogating design thinking, capture values that you think resonate, and they will go into the big co-creation machine. The second piece is around our collaboration with Design at Business. So I think the names come up. You've seen Lillian yesterday, John. All of us are a community of practitioners, and we're a safe space also where the lone raiders can get together and discuss the challenges of implementing this mindset. If we can have the one slide with the mural. So as Design at Business, we actually boldly thought we would create a unique artifact just for this conference. So we've actually started preparing, I think we were the first, in April and May already, through a series of co-creation sessions to actually say this very African notion, and there's a picture of our mural board. We use the competitor product to Miro, so that's why you're only going to see it on the screen here. But we sort of thought, what is the globalization of Ubuntu? Could this be a more universal principle? We were very encouraged by our global peers who are thinking, hey, I think Africa has a real gift to give to the world of leadership and design thinking by sharing this humanist ethos and methodology. So a lot of your content input, there's a special space on our Miro board. It'll inform the publication that we will put out after the conference, and this is just sort of the snapshot of the 5 sessions we had together. So that will be celebration kind of moment and a co-creation moment. And the final moment around anticipation is we will try to then create a manifesto for Ubuntu design leadership together. And for that, you'll have to use the Mentimeter polling tool. So the official polling tool doesn't work, but I've been, Dave has helped me, I think, create a Mentimeter poll. So we'll try and make use of that. And there will be 10 statements that we've come up with and that we've co-created. And we would like to ask you to choose the top 3 that resonate mostly. So it's a quite nuanced, because they all kind of sound the same, but judge them from your heart space. So, there we go. So please photograph this QR code. Those of you that can, we'll keep it on long enough. So we are also using a special technique that those of you familiar with sort of indigenous knowledge systems know, which is the talking stick. So I promise I won't blow into this. It's a very special talking stick that South Africans and anyone that watched the World Cup in 2010 remembers from their loss of hearing. But I'm actually just using it as a ceremonial talking stick to hand it to the person. And, you know, the principle is give this person your full attention and appreciation and sort of undivided attention. Whoever has the talking stick is the person that will share his or her wisdom with us. So I will kick us off by handing the talking stick to Phumzile next to me, who will warm up with a little exercise. And I think we have to stand up for it.
At some point.
At some point.
But not yet. I would like to start off by building on the keynote dialogue and some of the themes, the salient themes flowing from day one, by first making a statement that there is a different leadership mindset that is needed as we enhance, as we improve ways of co-creating, of collaborating, of innovation through design thinking, particularly in culturally diverse contexts. And that different leadership mindset, I believe that Ubuntu offers a powerful way to frame the leadership mindset that is needed and that can help us to enhance. The second statement that I would like to make is that leadership is about people, and I think that was also mentioned earlier on. It's not about organizations, it's not about strategies, it's not about plans. It's at its core about people motivating other people towards a desired result. So that makes leadership people-centered. And the last statement that I would like to make by putting it to you and to establish a shared understanding is that leadership in the context of design thinking needs to be understood at 2 levels. The leadership that is within organizations, but then I also truly believe that as the people who are at the forefront of design thinking, we ourselves become leaders in that process. So if you are sitting here today and you have a network, and within that network you wield influence from the context of design thinking, that should make you a leader in your own right. So to come back to my warm-up exercise and my statements that I've put to you this morning, it's clear to me, at least, that there is a need and a call, and this is what we will be focusing on in our conversation, on each one of us, to think about how we are transforming our mindsets in order to inform behaviors that would then allow us to be able to work in ways that help us to really just progress, to connect across the different cultures, to co-create, to collaborate, but then also, very importantly, to ensure that in our connections, and this is what flowed from yesterday, that we keep trust, building trust, nurturing trust, to become the currency that really influences our relationships and everything that we do in our relationships. So If we think then about Ubuntu, and I'd just like to interject and ask, by a show of hands, who has heard the word Ubuntu before? I know that it was mentioned earlier on when there was a video clip that was playing, and we were very excited the scene already for our panel discussion. But by a show of hands, up until today, who had not yet heard of the word Ubuntu? Okay, so I see a new hand. Who has heard of the word Ubuntu but might be thinking, now that you mention it, I'm actually not quite sure what it means. Okay, thank you, fabulous. So what I would like to do then in the next exercise is to try and take you through a demonstration that will hopefully begin the process of creating a shared understanding of what Ubuntu means. Ubuntu is something that I believe has influenced and shaped me to be the person that I am today. Ubuntu is something that in the context of South Africa and Africa, we believe that it is our way of being. In fact, it becomes somewhat awkward when we find ourselves in a position where we have to sit down and explain what Ubuntu means, because we carry it in what we do, how we behave, our mindset, how we relate, how we interact, how we connect with others. So one of the things that I would like to do this morning to really start to bring Ubuntu closer to home, and then to bring it even more closer to the context of our conversation, design thinking, is to take you through an exercise. And this exercise, and I was thinking, how do I get the people in the room to really get to feel in their hearts and to start to understand what Ubuntu means? And it came to me through the richness of the cultural diversity that we have in South Africa. So in South Africa, we have 11 official languages. And some of you might know that we are even known as the Rainbow Nation. And I grew up at home with my dad, who's now 82, who speaks each one of the 11 official languages fluently, and another additional 2. So for me, growing up at home, and at any given point in time, depending on who my dad was communicating or interacting with, essentially, would immediately become a point of contact with the different languages that actually become an access into the different ethnic groups and the multiculturalism that we embrace. So when I greet, I often like to extend a proudly South African greeting by also greeting in the different languages in South Africa. And I would like to take this opportunity to greet you once again, just to demonstrate and to let your ear have a feel of this multiculturalism that we so embrace. So the first that you would be very familiar with is good morning. And our fellow South Africans would also be familiar with goeiemôre. And then if I go into the vernacular languages, then the greetings would sound something like dumelang, absheni, ndemachironi, lochani, molweni. And if I extend it to the one that is closest to my heart, sawubona. So sawubona is isiZulu, and isiZulu is where Ubuntu, the name Ubuntu, is also derived from. And I would like at this point for you to turn to the person to your left, the person to your right, the person behind you, find someone to look at and greet them in isiZulu. And we're going to have another repeat of this exercise, but this time after I have explained the nuances in the meaning of sawubona. And what I want you to pick up on is the feeling when you are greeting now, in the absence of the deepening of the understanding of what sawubona means, and to compare that or to relate that to the second greeting after I have explained to you the meaning of sawubona. So find someone next to you, and this is also a moment for you to learn one word. Zulu word.
Sawubona, ne?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Sawubona. interesting to observe. Interesting to, okay. So, may I have your attention, please? We're going to have to use the vuvuzela. Oh. May I have your attention, please? So, quite an interesting observation that I'm making, that I'm already picking up of those who actually do know the inherent meaning of sawubona, because I think the moment is now extending itself into that. All right, so those who may not know the deeper meaning of sawubona is that in English, for example, good morning, I mean, that is well understood what it means. But in isiZulu, when you greet sawubona, what it translates to and what it means is you are saying to the other person that you are greeting, I see you, sawubona. And that is singular. If it was plural, then it would be sanibonani, I see all of you. And through what can be considered an everyday, really, interaction, greeting, that perhaps maybe even most of us may not even put a lot of thought into it. When you relay it back into truly what it means I acknowledge you, that I see you as the person in your own right, acknowledging your sense of humaneness. And now, with the deepening of understanding what sawubona means, what I would like to invite you to do is to turn towards the person that you greeted previously, and this time, allow the meaning of sawubona to filter through how you are greeting them. And this time, it would require of you to stand up, which is also another form of respect when we convey the greeting. And look into the person's eyes, so maintain the eye contact. And then lean in and then say sawubona, and allow then that meaning of the word to take over the conversation, which is what was supposed to be. Sawubona, Uli.
I recognize your humanity.
I recognize you as well, no? In the morning.
Yes. So now I can get back to you. So yeah, next to the point.
Yeah.
Sawubona.
It's a really good.
I'm glad. I see you. Great. Okay. Blow the horn. Blow the horn.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the warm-up, Phumzile. And what's really great is that we have these two parallel boards up. So people in the virtual audience, thank you for starting to co-create. And those in the room as well, please start filling your post-it notes in terms of what values do you think are resonating if you think about Ubuntu as a mindset and as a way of being, essentially. I'm handing the talking stick to my brother Mugendi now, and he will come to us from his notion of participatory design and really having studied a lot of the wisdom that is contained in the proverbs that we are using on this continent, and how they also inform the notion of Ubuntu. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ulrich. Good morning, everyone. My audible.
Can you hear Mugendi well enough?
Can you hear me? Okay, that's better. I thought everyone was sawubona to the extreme. Yeah, so for me, Ubuntu is a very rich philosophy. And it's in the spirit of design thinking, it's a yes and. Most of us are familiar with the Cartesian logic of I think, therefore I am. And so Ubuntu extends that thinking to the community. So for example, I've coined my own understanding of Ubuntu to be, I participate, therefore I am. This means that it's not enough to be. Being needs to be active, and it needs to be engaged with the other. In fact, Leopold Senghor put it beautifully when he said that I feel the other, I dance the other, therefore I am. And this idea of the dance means that there's something of a dialogue even though you're using kinetic movement as a basis of the dialogue. So Ubuntu demands response. You cannot speak of Ubuntu without being involved. You cannot speak of Ubuntu without participating in the life of other people, because you only become fully human in the context of other people. And then Ubuntu also is extremely rich, and we've often spoken about this, and I'm very happy, and Richard, thank you, because that little asterisk over there with the 7 points is actually borrowed from the Adinkra symbols. It's a symbol of creativity, which is inspired by the spider and the web it creates out of nothingness to feed and to create geometric beauty that we cannot even start to imagine. So the idea of co-creation, the idea that I need others to contribute to the idea that I have, the yes and, which is very much a design thinking principle, really reinforces this concept of Ubuntu. And then I also wanted to say something about Ubuntu also is it has to be context specific. Often we want a formulaic approach to thinking about things, but Ubuntu demands that you suspend judgment, and deferring judgment is another design thinking principle, so that you can focus on the moment. And this, unfortunately, excuse me, this also leads to the understanding of African time. And many people have grappled with this idea that African time is so flexible. But the reason African time is flexible because it speaks to the event of the moment. So if I meet someone who needs my help and I had an appointment, that person who needs my help gets prominence and preeminence in my time allocation. So it's not the disrespect of the other, it's actually because I'm responding to the urgency of the situation I'm in. And just before I hand over this beautiful talking stick, right now it's more of a shouting stick, there's this beautiful Sierra Leonean proverb that says that a razor may be sharper than an axe, but it cannot cut wood. And this is what Ubuntu is about. It's about appropriateness to the context and the situation you're in. And the beauty of the proverbs also is that they're non-prescriptive. What you hear from the proverb may be your own story. So for example, if I mention in our campaign to survive the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the proverbs that we used frequently was, if you don't want to get eaten by a crocodile, cross the river in a crowd. And you can take what you want. Someone will get fascinated by the crocodile and stay there, and someone else will think of the survival once you cross the river. So this is the beauty of Ubuntu. And participation, as mentioned, is key. And you only become a richer and fuller human being when you are in the context of others. So it's communitarianism, not communism. And this is something we often have to explain. It is the context of the community playing the role that is complementary to that of the individual, not one being subservient to the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mugendi and Phumzile. And I want to bring our brother Joern into this, because what was very interesting about the co-creation journey, and as you know, Joern is a very senior leader in terms of the business world, is that we have some people for whom Ubuntu is their mother tongue, and some have learned it as a foreign language. And I'm very proud of Joern's journey to co-create with us, not coming from this kind of cultural context. So it's possible for all of you to learn the language of Ubuntu. And I want to bring in Joern's reflections now to say, as an international business leader, is this concept something that resonates in the world of business? Is this even relevant? And how does it impact how we do design thinking, innovation in large organizations?
Thanks, Uli. I think those were like 3 or 4 questions in one go.
Sorry.
It's, first of all, it has been an amazing journey with the whole team, with Jenny, with Richard, etc. When we worked with Uli over the 6-7 months on how do we get here. And it was such a learning curve when suddenly the team around the community of design and business picked up the theme with Wiebke Picker, with Sandra Werner, with Christine Wenzel, who were all in the background, saying, well, there's such a connection on the meaning, which we only had a finger glimpse on what it actually meant on Ubuntu. I can tell you, we spoke about just the timing, the different African timing and the concept. One of my first learning was, or I've been just in a shallow involved, having the team, having the project being set up, and the first team check-in on the project took African time. I was like an hour and a half just to get the sense feeling. But that was Ubuntu, getting this feeling across, getting that meaning. Why are we actually here? Why are we as a team and not literally driving the process? And I can tell you, having that Swiss heritage of time pacing in my heart, that was pretty difficult. That was like having a full stop coming across. Now for us, it's being time pressured, being there. But that has been one of the first most intense learning, and then utilizing what it means. Sam mentioned a little bit before the topic about the lonely rider, the lonely soldier, the diplomatic rebel that we all are in large organizations. How can we unite ourselves in difference and bring that together? And my learning was really in that context of Ubuntu, which reflects in a family notion as a heritage, which we sometimes lose and have lost in the past. And it's not a privilege, mostly in a large organization any longer, to apply that. And the transformation of 6 months came across to say, well, where does leadership has an important role? We've been hearing yesterday continuously the meaning about trust, leadership, enablement, bringing that across, and even this morning. And one of the key transformations for us was leadership. Leadership starts within us. In first of all, we are all leaders of ourselves on what we do and how we apply. So how can we make that a meaning and how we interact amongst each other, how we interact with us, and then how we actually apply and transform and stimulate the transformation in an organization, bringing it across.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joern. If I may also just echo this with a very concrete example of the business world. I think, I'm not sure if Terry is in the room, but let me mention one of our local banks, Nedbank, and they have really embraced the notion quite specifically around being a responsible corporate citizen. And just maybe to formulate one of the guiding frameworks that they have established is they are saying you cannot be a successful company in an unsuccessful country. So it's this notion, and in Ubuntu we have the notion not of winner takes all, which is more the Western notion, but of leaving no one behind, and actually of saying we cannot enjoy our prosperity as a business if the rest of society is still struggling and failing. So this is a way how the Ubuntu mindset can really inform corporate strategy, corporate purpose in a very direct way to say, let us not, you know, the other African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So how do you then actually ensure that in your path towards progress, prosperity, profit, and success, you take people along with you and get them to contribute actively and participate in your success? So those of you that are going on that tour this afternoon, you'll hear much more about that when you visit Nedbank, but I think it's just one of the examples. If I may now hand the talking stick back to Phumzile, I think your passion is about that self-leadership. It starts inside me moment. Could you maybe unpack a little bit for us how that shows up in the world of business and leadership, this dimension of self-leadership?
Thank you, Uli. Before I go there, allow me to share a story that was triggered as you were talking about winner takes all versus no one left behind. And that brought to my mind a story that was a take of a certain anthropologist experience with Ubuntu on his visit to Africa. And during this visit, he proposed a game to African tribal children, small children. And what he did is he took a basket full of sweets, put it near to a tree, and then asked the children to stand in a circle 100 meters from the basket with the sweets, and then said to them, the first one to reach that basket takes all of the sweets. Do you know what happened when he said, ready, steady, go? The children, they all reached out their hands, held one another's hands, and together ran towards the basket, and they took the sweets, divided them, and enjoyed them equally. And when he asked them, but why did you do that? The children simply answered, but that's Ubuntu. And I would like to tie the moral of that story to leaders in an organizational context and how Ubuntu should ideally shape the mindset of leaders in how they lead. And it is fundamentally about understanding the whole notion of previously, I think also a very Eurocentric approach in organizational leadership context that really perpetuates individualism, that tends to be very competitive, versus an Afrocentric approach that places then an emphasis on interdependence, on collectivism, collective vision, and leaving no one behind. And this was something that I experienced personally, taking my authentic self into organizations that were going through transformation, that were previously very Eurocentric in their cultures, in their approaches, but then they were at a point where they were becoming more and more heterogeneous. The representativity was changing within organizations. And I would always observe myself as a leader, how my approach and how I led was very different to the organizational culture. And even my colleagues would ask me, but there's something different in how you are leading. And for me, having led big multicultural, multilingual teams, for me, I always used to come back to asking myself 3 key questions. What is expected of us? Me as a leader, the team that I am leading, what is our goal? What is our desired result? And that used to resonate very much with the cultures that existed. So very target-driven, very result. You know, every day you come in and all you see amongst your team is human doings. Let's do, and hit those targets. And what I then started to observe, which differentiated me, was instead of being very quick to start with the doing, to actually take a moment, pause, and ask myself, who do I need to be, personally myself and my team by extension, for us to be able to do what is expected of us? And some of the answers that would come to my mind was, you would need to be inclusive. Because if you go and you tell people what to do without necessarily participating, involving them, so that they can develop the deeper understanding and take ownership and there's buy-in, then actually the weight is going to rest more on your shoulder than on the rest of us as a collective. So when I started to pay attention to the next question, who do I need to be? What do we need to be as a collective? Then I started to realize that the being, the human being, preceded the human doing.
Thank you very much, Phumzile. Thank you. Yes. I'm giving the talking stick back to Mugendi, and if you Google him, he's quite famous actually in the city, and he has bestowed a lot of his participatory design gifts on Cape Town. So if we move from the self-leadership dimension, Mugendi, to participatory design, co-creation, maybe with communities and other stakeholders, What are some of the lessons you can give to the audience on how to design participatory processes?
Thanks again. The first lesson we learn is that the last mile is a human mile. This one of the projects that we did in Cape Town in one of the informal settlements, where we were looking at solid waste management with the city of Cape Town, and we had a clear mandate from the city to find a way to improve sanitation and cleanliness of the informal settlement. And by using the Ubuntu philosophy in participatory design, the first thing that the ladies of that community told us was they needed birth certificates for their children. So immediately that took us completely off because that was not part of our brief. But we realized that in the spirit of building trust, because as has been said many times today, the currency of exchange in these human relationships is trust. And empathy and humility are a subtle balance that you need to, as a designer, you need to humble yourself to the point where you respect the voice of the community members, but also immerse yourself sufficiently to have empathy and understanding of their context. So we spoke to the city, and fortunately the city actually fast-tracked the issuance of the birth certificates. But later we asked them, why did you ask for birth certificates when we came here to discuss sanitation and solid waste management? And they said, without birth certificates, our children cannot get into school. And once they don't get into school, all our hopes and aspirations then are doomed because we're investing in the next generation. Then they told us something also very interesting. The place is called Doenbach in Danun, which I don't even know what it means. I think it's a Dutch Afrikaans word, which I'll find out later. But they told us they had an Xhosa name for it. They called it Sibabalwe. So they called their own community Sibabalwe, which means we are blessed. So that's the next thing that really changed our perspective, that we're looking at them and thinking, oh, my informal settlement, you must be struggling. And they're saying, no, we are blessed. Almost saying it could have been worse. And that challenged us completely to start appreciating what we found. In Kenya, we did something similar with a community which was looking at how to deal with hair extensions that are discarded. And the women immediately found ways to weave it into baskets. And the men, with some of the offcuts, started using it to reinforce the clay bricks that they were making. And even after firing, the bricks were actually much stronger. So it's always good to listen to community members because there's a kind of embedded wisdom, tacit knowledge, local knowledge that they have that none of us can even pretend to be. At best, we can at least tell them about design thinking and how the tools are used. So I've been inspired by Phumzile to tell a quick story about why we need to be humble. And the story, some of you may have heard it because I'm a storyteller, as is in the Afrikan and Ubuntu tradition. The story is of the lion waking up one day on the savannah and taking a walk, a beautiful day, maybe not as overcast as this. And he comes across a monkey and asks the monkey, do you know who I am? And the monkey, without hesitation, says, you, sir, are the king of the jungle. And of course, lion loves that response. But as most of us who know about polls and research, you have to triangulate. So he finds the next animal, which is a buffalo, and asks the buffalo. And buffalo also, without hesitating, says, you, sir, are the king of the jungle. Now, of course, lion is extremely happy and decides, now one last time, just to be sure. So he sees the elephant and asks the same question. So what happens next is beyond a lion's expectation. He's picked by the trunk and beaten literally almost to death by the elephant. And then he lifts a bruised eye and tells the elephant, you don't need to get so violent just because you don't know the answer. So what this tells us is humility and empathy need to go hand in hand, because poor lion didn't realize not everyone knows who he is, and some actually don't care. And so we need to, as designers who want to push design thinking, have that humility and that empathy that lets us connect with the aspirations of the people we deal with. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mugendi. Quite an amazing story. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to come back to Joern, who's seen a lot of lions in the corporate world as well, and elephants and hippos and I'm sure other animals. Joern, if you think about your specific journey as an innovator in large organizations and trying to create a culture of innovation and participation, how do you think this Ubuntu mindset could be helpful in this journey?
Creating a culture, I mean, creating transformation or creating a culture, I mean, it's always that the specific question, can we actually create a culture? Well, quite often I really like the phrase, the culture is happening when nobody's looking. So if nobody's looking, actually, can we influence it? To which extent? And that has been a very, very long journey for us in here to say, well, we can stimulate a culture of innovation behaviors, bringing that across. We can start seeding, amplifying it with the right methods that we get from the D-School, with the other influencers, really bringing that across. How can we transform a culture from applying elements of design thinking into living design thinking in the spirit of Ubuntu? I mean, there's a fundamental long shift, and we all have been hearing that's not easy. It's not a task that comes, well, no, Sam, no, you're not very versed. Well, it's not going to be something where an executive says, well, I got the idea, you get the mandate, make it happen in the next 12 months. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. Culture doesn't come in a time period. Culture comes in an up and down, and it continuously confronted with change. Now, you may have an executive and sponsoring coming across. Of course, that changes. Organization change, a vision change, a North Star changes. But your belief doesn't change in here, that there is a need. One of our fundamental topics was, I have been at the beginning one of those absolutely lonely riders, lonely soldiers in my organization. And at very, very early stages, I remember sitting with George and driving with him through the Swiss mountains, which he's never going to forget. How do we establish this behavior, this mindset in an organization? And how can we utilize and using strengths from others? Because I'm that lonely rider in an organization which is huge. What was it that we can do? Now, I really recall the example that Sam has been sharing. Now, he has been preaching the need, the impact. Well, we need to listen to the customer. Well, some have been listening to him, some cared, but actually the majority didn't bother. So sometimes you need to get your peers in, even from another side, to say, you know what, help me. We all know that best. I mean, I have children. I mean, and losing the microphone.
Yes.
That's all right. Is it gone? No, it's back. If I talk to my children and explain, something, if I'm lucky, they may going to be listening to me. We mostly know the experience, but if somebody else is coming in as an influencer, well, the acceptance is quite higher, and the same is in a business context. Now, if I invite my friends to say, well, Uli, I got a problem, or Falk, it's like, would you mind coming in and giving a different perspective, speaking from an outside angle? And that has been one of the fundamental reasons more than 10 years ago, when we literally have been sitting around the table of those lonely riders, and thinking about what is it that we can be doing under one umbrella. And that's why we shaped and formed the community, the Association of Designer Business. It was not about what we do, but it's how we do innovation, how we apply, how we transform and make a transformation. And when we look into my learnings over the last 6 months, and as I said, this was only a glimpse how that resonates into Ubuntu. There were unlimited and uncountless aha moments in there. Because even the essence to say, hey, we're transforming a team, a united team. We're not the individual that really brings it together. And the manifestors say, well, I am because we are. where best wouldn't that be resonating in a design thinking spirit? I cannot run design thinking, I cannot solve the problem by myself. So, and that was one of the fundamental topics and reasons why we said, well, there's a perfect match that really, really resonates in what we're trying to accomplish as one big family, bringing that across.
Thank you so much, Joern. Yes. Thank you also to everyone that's putting up post-its. So I'll encourage the people in the room as well to not stop putting up post-its. Allow me to also add maybe 2 examples from the African business context that I operate in, where these principles both of self-leadership and participatory design come to the fore. So we have 1 or 2 large organizations in South Africa where leaders have started to show up differently and embrace more African ways of leading. And one of the very interesting platforms how this gets enabled, and as Phumzile said, often we are uncomfortable because at business schools we still learn quite a Eurocentric way of managing and showing up. And both of those leaders have created more informal settings. One of them created a book club at her home for female leaders to meet every Tuesday evening and just to discuss issues that are of a more informal nature about how to behave differently and how to create more confidence in maybe leading differently. And the other leader, who leads a very large telecoms business, has a Sunday lunch club where other emerging leaders that he mentors and guides can benefit from his stories and get confidence that it's okay for them to show up differently, to behave maybe in a non-traditional way. So the one thing is really creating those safe spaces, those alternative spaces, because our boardrooms are really still in the type of expected behavior more Eurocentric in what is expected of people. And the other great story is about the last mile being a human mile, and one of the companies that I want to highlight that is also participating this afternoon is an engineering company called Zutari, and they have an amazing portfolio of work of how they deploy large infrastructure with community buy-in. So when they build a dam, a bridge, a railway station, a water treatment plant, they really look at this as an asset that doesn't just drop from the sky or by government, but that is co-created with the community on board. And they've created an amazing portfolio of work, and you can also look at their website where you can really see how these large infrastructure projects become shared community assets. And from a business perspective, it also de-risks the whole process, because if the community adopts this as their asset, they take better care of it. And if they can see their own voices reflected in the final solution, then it's not just something that was designed for them, but designed with them. And I think this is something that I'm very encouraged by, that some of our large banks, telecommunications companies, insurance companies, they're all starting to embrace the Ubuntu philosophy and trying to sort of go off the traditional, more profit-centric path, and maybe also to resonate with what Lillian from Brazil said yesterday. Those of us that operate in a context where government fails to deliver basic services, it's often up to the private sector or large companies to come in as members of civil society to also contribute to some of the basic infrastructure, and that creates a win-win situation. Before we go into, okay, the polling is up and running. Do you want to maybe give me a final statement, and then I'll reveal the polling. So thank you for everyone that voted. If you haven't yet voted, you still have a little opportunity. So these are our statements that we have co-created in our journey. And even though they might sound similar at the intellectual, rational level, we want you to read it through the heart space, to really say, what resonates with me, and where do I think Ubuntu in my own personal sphere of influence could be an important principle. So we have about 10 minutes to go. So before we open up for questions, I'd like each of my friends on stage to just leave us with a final bit of wisdom and advice, because we've now interrogated Ubuntu, we have celebrated some examples of it, and now let's anticipate of what all of us that are in the room, and we are all part of this Africa with a K movement now, so how do we maybe show up differently in our workplaces on Monday morning?
Thank you. I think for me it starts with conviction. I think for me it starts with leading into this part of the conversation, hopefully gaining a deeper understanding of the notion of Ubuntu and challenging yourself whether this does truly resonate and speak to your heart. And if there is, even if it is but a small sense of conviction, for me, I believe that that should be the basis that should motivate you to begin to really just develop a deeper appetite for you to want to understand it better, but not only understanding it, but practicing it. And I would say that being afforded the privilege to carry my authentic self from Ubuntu, that has helped to shape who I am, and it extended itself into leading and the engagements that I get to do through leadership coaching with the leaders. I am an advocate of Ubuntu as really the leadership mindset whose time is now, that can truly help us to be able to transform personally as leaders, so that we can take that sense of being that projects itself through warmth, through empathy, through nourishing, establishing a strong foundation of trust, respect, that is something that can extend itself also into how we lead and set the tone of organizational humility from an organizational context. Thank you.
Thank you. Mugendi, can I hand it straight over?
Thank you. I think I'd like to leave two thoughts. One, which even the Chaos Pilot, which is a famous Danish school, advances, is leadership from any chair. This is very complementary to Ubuntu. Do not look down on someone who doesn't have a high status in the organization coming up with an idea that could actually transform that organization. So leadership from any chair. Then secondly, within the context of Africa with a K, which we'd be happy to discuss further during the tea break, I'd like to quote Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of Ghana after it gained independence. And Kwame Nkrumah said something that is very powerful and very profound. He says, "I'm not an African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me." And I'd like to ask that we allow this idea of Africa with a K, which is a deep philosophical notion pinned by Ubuntu, to inform the way we engage with the denizens of this continent. Africa is a massive, yet beautiful and diverse place, and we cannot even start to imagine just how much we ourselves as professionals can gain from interacting with communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think, Mugendi, and factually speaking, we were all born in Africa as well, if we think back long enough. The other interesting quote that now that you mentioned Kwame Nkrumah was also quite interesting to say, we face neither east nor west, we face forward. So it's this whole notion of not being caught up in those dogmatic fights between east or west or something, but to chart our own paths and being really proud that we have something special, and as Phumzile said, that the world is kind of waiting for us to actually bring to the table. We sort of are ahead of the curve, it seems, in terms of management trends and the future ways of working in a weird way. So Joern, I will give you the talking stick one last time to leave us with some wisdom.
I think it's not wisdom. We all have been hearing that and living that, and quite often we look at different angles. And one of my key learnings over the years has been to be authentic, be yourself. in really what you do, because we are all individuals, we are all unique, and that uniqueness, combining that, makes that difference, building that strength if you want to make a change and a difference. So living that authenticity and accepting that in whatever we do, because we are one team, and we are completely different. It's really acknowledging that. Quite often we miss that, and that brings me to a second reflection. Quite often we benchmark ourselves. I would like to be as. I'm not good as. I'm different as in here. But the context about appreciate inquiry takes a little bit as a methodology from a different angle. Appreciate really what are you good at? And what happens if you strengthen that, if you really enforce that further? Does that make a difference in here? Can I help my team? Can I help my unit? Can I change my leadership style? No? So appreciate who you are. We are all unique in the way we make a difference. So I think we don't need to look around, I would like to be as. No, we are as we are. And I think if we live and utilize that in a more meaningful way, I think we can make a difference, we can make a change.
Thank you so much, Joern. We have 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and before we sort of release, that's the Swiss in me, I have learned. No, so we have time for 3 questions, I think, before we release the final results, and Rob's already got the first question there. Thank you.
Hi. I'd just like to ask, in terms of Ubuntu and empathy, and to any of you, I acknowledge that they are understood and studied in like a really different ontology, a kind of different frame of reference. What would you say, do you see as the connection? I know there are a lot of people who say that they're similar or that they're the same, and there's also a lot of criticism of that. So I'd like to hear how you see empathy and Ubuntu.
Thank you.
Connected
Mugendi,
or not?
Phumzile?
Yeah. I speak?
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I think there's points at which empathy and Ubuntu actually relate to one another. But I'd argue that Ubuntu is more of a comprehensive philosophy of life. It informs the way one, in fact, interacts with other human beings, with the planet, with everything that they interact with. So it's not just dealing with one human being and another, but it's also stewardship of everything that you have, even your own environment and planet. Empathy, on the other hand, is a universal attribute that anyone can gain without even referencing Ubuntu. So I can have empathy without Ubuntu, but I cannot have Ubuntu without empathy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Johnny there, and then here. Thank you. You made it.
Also another question directed at Mugendi. I'm curious about the intersection of design thinking and storytelling, which is close to your heart as it is mine, and I also travel widely in Africa, and how that can be used in transforming and empowering communities.
Okay, thanks again. Design is storytelling. This is where I start. And so the natural relationship between design and storytelling is, design is directed storytelling. So I think all we do is we direct the storytelling towards a specific message and a specific outcome that we anticipate. So the relationship is as elegant as I can imagine. And when you listen to the way people tell stories on the continent, they don't just tell stories for entertainment. The stories are told for educational purposes. They are told for inspiration. They are told for mobilizing transformative energies so that people can actually act upon situations, circumstances, and phenomena. So I think the relationship between the two, for me, I've actually never thought of them as being separate. But because design is directed storytelling, then all you have to do is direct those stories into the design process. And we've used them in many examples of our projects. where we ask someone who's participating to tell us a story about the specific issue we are looking at. And immediately, just by extracting themes from that story, those become the pointers that then start to inform our interventions. And that has been very fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the final question here in the front?
No pressure.
No pressure.
Thanks for the interesting panel. My question is, I want to know more about the Africa with a K and a star, with the hope that Africa is born at least a little bit in all of us.
Mugendi, why not, eh?
I'm going to suggest that some of you follow me up at the coffee break. But essentially, Africa with a K is a contrast between Africa with a C. So the way we argue as a kind of epistemological tool is that Africa with a C is how the rest of the world sees Africa from the outside looking into Africa. This contrasts with Africa with a K, which is how Africa sees itself and wants to project itself to the rest of the world. So the Africa with a K is a more authentic, co-created narrative that Africa itself is creating about itself. And I think it's a far more nuanced, but also it's also informed by the fact that we have over 2,500 languages in Africa. And every single one of those languages spells Africa with a K. I learned also the Dutch and the Germans and a few others. We can always co-opt you. But Africa is very inclusive. It's very inclusive. But that's the basis of this Africa with a K. So it's Africa telling its own story, and inspired by a proverb by Chinua Achebe from Nigeria, that until lions have their own historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So we've chosen to be the historians of the lion, to tell the lion's story, not just the hunter's perspective. Thank you.
And there we go, time's up. So now the moment, this was kind of an evangelization moment, so we've collected in this congregation all the Post-its. So thank you so much for contributing to the baskets, your tithing this morning. All of this is not in vain, because we will really use this in terms of our publications as we move towards the Ubuntu Design Leadership Manifest. And now we can reveal, Dave, the results of the vote. So yeah, try to remember the numbers. There we go. So we have two very strong contenders in 1 and 2. And I think, obviously this is not difficult because you've got to remember what was statement 8, 3, and 5. But, there we go. So the winner is, I believe that an Ubuntu approach to design, leadership, and innovation will lead to the creation of more sustainable solutions to the real problems of our time. Great choice. Number 3, I believe that an Ubuntu mindset will help us move from a winner-takes-all world into a world where no one's left behind. And number 5, I believe that if I lead with an Ubuntu-inspired mindset, our organization will become a more compassionate place where creativity will flourish. So give us all a round of applause. Yeah, so continue to engage with us. We are continuing on this journey as Design at Business. Link up, look us up on LinkedIn, and I think this is Africa. Is the time for the break now? Almost, yeah. Almost. Thank you. So just a final...
You well practiced in the Vuvuzela there, Ulrich. Thank you very much. Round of applause, please, for Ulrich and his panel.